the crumbling precipice of the legendary, storied, overwrought episode 4 of your favorite podcast of all time and even beyond that, NERTZ. I'm your host, Mathew Klickstein, the second best podcast host after that guy with the dog, and for those of you wondering from last time why this is episode 4 and that was episode 5, well, first of all, I don't have to answer any of your damn questions because you're simply not loud enough. Secondly, we are putting together the episode with Mike Reiss, our very, very special but not in that way guest, who's been writing for The Simpsons since day one, when we were able to connect with another longtime friend, Maggie Roswell, who has voiced numerous characters on the show, such as Maude Flanders, and we said, well, the hell with it. Let's hold off until the next episode. And there we are. To quote Steve Allen, be that as it may, and I doubt it was. Point is, we have here, folks, two major forces from what is very likely not only one of your favorite shows of all time, but this series that helped make you the person you are today. Mike Reiss is indeed a nearly 30-year veteran of the writing staff on the show, and was in fact a showrunner, meaning big boss man on the series, along with writing partner Al Jean back in season 3 and 4. He also co-created the Critic, that lovable porcine fellow with one part Siskel and one part Ebert, all parts John Lovitz, from back in the day, and was a big man on campus over there at the historic National Lampoon. You can actually check Reiss out now in the documentary about the magazine, Drunk, Stoned, Brilliant, Dead. Maggie Roswell, meanwhile, as mentioned, voices Maude Flanders, along with such characters as Lisa's teacher, Miss Hoover, Milhouse's mom, Luann, Reverend Lovejoy's wife, Helen, and various ancillary characters, such as her Emmy-nominated role as Shary Bobbins. But to me and our friends, she'll always sound in real life particularly like Ms. Hoover. Don't believe me? Here's quick proof of how similar the voice is to her own, in an excerpt from Maggie and I just shooting the shit about The Simpsons, and, being a consummate voice actress as she is, her not being able to help belt out a little Hoover while recounting a favorite moment involving the dim-witted classmate of Lisa's, Ralph Wiggum, and his put-upon teacher.
And that was one of my favorite moments. But, you know, the thing that he said when, Miss Hoover? Yes, Ralph. Well, I ate my worm. Well, you know, what should I, can I have another one? No, Ralph, why don't you lay your head down and sleep? And she goes and sleep while the others are learning. And he goes, sleep, that's where I'm a Viking.
Okay, but enough clearing our throats here. Or wait, no, just a little bit more. Those nerdsers out there who have been listening to NERTZ for a while now know we don't just talk about nerd and geek culture on this podcast, but really dredge up some pretty deep what have you about what it all means. And this episode is no different. When we're trying to turn our incisive, investigative lasers on such major geek shibboleths as The Simpsons, we have to be as mindful as possible. There's just so much to mine here, so much to discuss, so much to get right, and of course, so much to get wrong. Mike Reiss, who I've talked to for years now about all sorts of things, is himself getting a mite bit tired of the scholarly silliness and fan theories that crop up when it comes to the show he's been shepherding for longer than most of his fans have been alive.
Again, I say the fans get it. The people I meet one-on-one, they understand the show, they like it, they don't take it over, they appreciate it without taking it too seriously. But then there was a time, especially in the early days of The Simpsons, where we were in the newspapers every single day, and 90% of the time what I would read in the papers was wrong, and that's where it made me think, gee, if 90% of what they write about The Simpsons is wrong, it gives me I feel maybe 90% of everything I read in the papers is wrong. So I don't go for that. And then the academic papers, too. I cannot believe what I read. I can't believe the level of hot air that The Simpsons has generated. There's a website that has archived all these scholarly papers written about The Simpsons. And one day I said, I'm going to start reading these, and I'll read the paper till I hit an error, and then I'll go to the next paper. And every time, I never got more than like 3 paragraphs into any of these scholarly papers where I just go, wrong. No, they got it all wrong. No, they're taking it too seriously. No, they're reading way too much into it. You know, that's it. It is a show. We work hard at the show, but we really just build it. We don't have a grand plan. We don't have a grand philosophy. And we really sweat it a joke at a time. It's a show we build every single week, brick by brick.
So let's get into it with a bit more hot air, shall we? I didn't talk here to Reiss or Maggie just because they're friends, really fucking cool and easy to talk with. along with their whole connection to the Simpsons thing. I wanted to discuss with them my own wacky theory about how we can finally, at long last, break down the nerd, geek, dork categories using helpful examples from The Simpsons that everyone can understand. Think about it. A nerd is someone who is so into what she is doing that she doesn't care about anything else, except what she's into. She wouldn't even necessarily consider herself a nerd. She just does what she does and kind of wants to be left alone to do it. Lisa Simpson is a nerd. A geek is someone who wants everyone to know what a geek he is. Like the author Douglas Copeland, who also popularized the term Gen X back in the day, writes in his prescient 1995 novel Microsurfs, quote, "A geek is a nerd who knows he is one," unquote. The geek sells nerd culture, insults nerd culture, criticizes nerd culture, wants everyone to know how nerdy or geeky he is. He's the first in line at the new Star Wars and wants everyone to know he's there. Jealous? He's all about personal branding and social media and making sure everyone sees what a big geek he is. Comic book guy is a geek. And then there's the dork who's simply not good at anything. He's neither smart nor good looking. He's not athletic and is kind of out of it. He'll never be anything but a dork. It's in his blood. It's who he is. Remember that episode of The Simpsons when Bart is made to look like a nerd due to a series of odd circumstances, ending up with thick glasses and looking into seemingly nerdy friend Milhouse's own lenses, seeing his reflection and crying out, "I'm a nerd," with Milhouse concurring, "So am I." But no, Milhouse is not a nerd. There's even a later episode where Bart suggests Milhouse speak to the techie producers about their online cartoon show. "You can speak nerd to them," he says, with Milhouse reminding, "I'm not a nerd, nerds are smart." True, Milhouse Van Houten is not a nerd. Milhouse is a dork. The nerd, Lisa, creates and innovates. The geek, comic book guy, complains and promotes. And the dork, Milhouse, well, he can't do anything right. What do Maggie Roswell and Mike Reiss think about this theory of Lisa equals nerd, comic book guy equals geek, and Milhouse equals dork? Well, first, a little background on how the characters grew out of thin, or in comic book guy's case, fat, air for some helpful context. We'll start with Milhouse. Take it away, Mike Reiss.
He was actually created for the Butterfingers commercial. It was the thing that came in between Tracy Ullman and the Simpsons series. I think that's where he made his first appearance, so it's not an auspicious beginning that he was born just to fill out a Butterfingers commercial. But yeah, again, he grew the way comic book guys grew. I think he wasn't a nerd. He wasn't that much of a character. He was just Bart's friend, and he was the kid who looked up to Bart. And, you know, maybe he had the glasses and the huge schnoz to give him a little vulnerability. But no, he wasn't just a total loser. It was just sort of that was the character we found for him. He became more and more of a loser, and then suddenly he had asthma. And then once we introduced his parents, and his parents looked just like him, and he made his father such a super loser that, yeah, he sort of became doomed to fulfilling this role as a, you know, sort of a hereditary loser.
But Milhouse isn't a bad guy. In fact, he probably hasn't a villainous bone in his body. We may not necessarily empathize with Milhouse, but we certainly sympathize with him. That is, we feel bad for him. So in order to keep the pathos there, along with the humor, Reiss and his team have a very thin tightrope to walk.
It may even happen as a result of this interview. It may happen in a year or two where we do just wake up one day and we just go, we've gone too far with Milhouse. Or let's restore some dignity to Milhouse. Let's give his parents a break. You know, I think we split up his parents, and that got a little too tragic, and we put them back together now in sort of an uneasy marriage. But, you know, it's never, we like the character. We're all fond of the woman who plays Milhouse, but we don't want to drag him through hell. We don't think I don't think any of us just love, we don't think there's great comedy in just sort of making life miserable for this little boy.
The geeky comic book guy types out there online, it turns out, might in fact have a little bit more say in the matter than you'd think, as some of the writers for The Simpsons, such as Reiss's perennial writing partner Al Jean, take to heart much of what they read in the comments and worst episode everness of online quote-unquote fans, as it were. Keeping an ear to the grindstone of their fan base is another way Simpsons writers and showrunners are able to navigate just how dorky to make Milhouse. How far can they go before, gee, that's hilarious, turns into, hey guys, that's just cruel?
Very often just comes from, it'll come from the writer, very often comes from the showrunner who just goes, all right, we've gone too far. Let's not keep doing that. Again, Al Jean, I mentioned, is a man who watches the fan boards and watches the fan sites, and it's very easy just to dismiss, the naysayers online as just being a bunch of malcontents and negativists. But Al very often takes the stuff to heart, and with good reason, It was online first where we would hear Homer's becoming too much of a jerk, Homer's becoming too stupid, and we modified and adjusted the character that way. So sometimes it comes from outside, sometimes it just comes from us watching our own show. It's very often it's very easy to drag a character through the mud, and then 8 months later we see the episode finished and in color, and it looks like a Simpsons. We go, and we're just watching them. We've gone too far. This is not right. Let's not do this anymore.
Lisa's start on the show was similar and progressed in the same manner as Milhouse's and comic book guys, as it turns out. She was almost a side thought to Bart at first, and in fact was not really all that nerdy in the beginning, but evolved a great deal after being imbued with some existential, introspective thinking.
It came incrementally, but much faster. I think, Al Jean and I wrote one of the very first Simpsons episodes, and where it ends, it's no disgrace like Homer, which ends with the whole family getting shock therapy. That's what people remember from it. But Lisa's just a brat. I mean, for most of the Simpsons shorts, and even the early episodes, she's just like Bart. She's just a bad, naughty, regular kid. And I think she took a quantum leap in an episode that Al and I wrote, but it was not our idea. It all came from Jim Brooks. It came from Moaning Lisa, where he said, let's have Lisa be sad. And that's the episode. She is having an existential crisis, which is the kind of thing you'd never see on a cartoon show, and probably not even on a live-action show about kids, just a kid depressed. And I think she took a major leap there suddenly in giving her an episode like that, defining her as an 8-year-old girl with a lot of deep thoughts and problems.
Making Lisa more introspective, and by proxy perhaps quote-unquote nerdier, came in many regards from James L. Brooks, or Jim as friends, colleagues, and Mike Reiss calls him, the filmmaker behind such movies as Terms of Endearment, Broadcast News, and As Good as It Gets, who's also the creator of various TV shows, in addition to one of the main principles of The Simpsons, such as Taxi, where he had been trying to do the same thing that they did to Lisa to lovable Andy Kaufman character Latka.
If there's one thing you got to thank him for, is taking these cartoon characters and putting immense depth into all of them, and finding their dignity. And it was funny when he pitched that episode to us. I know Al and I were just going, how are we going to write it? We didn't understand it. It was very difficult. When we came out of the meeting, I think Sam Simon said, Jim likes that idea. He said he used to pitch it on Taxi. I think he wanted an episode where Latka was sad. And Matt Groening just said, he didn't know it. He said, you're the guys who got stuck writing the Lisa is sad episode. So he didn't see much in it. And Sam Simon just said, this is Jim up to his old tricks. And we did it, I won't say grudgingly, but with a lot of trepidation. And then that was it. It really helped bring the character forward, found a whole new level for her in 1.5 hours.
For voice actress par excellence Maggie Roswell, Lisa is certainly a prime nerd because of something far beyond her introspection and even brightness.
Lisa, definitely is, the smartest and the everything, but I also don't think that she is totally people skills. I mean, she has some people skills, but not really. If you think of her in the classrooms of any of that stuff, it's not like she has a bunch of friends, which is why she's so pissed off with Bart that he has so many friends. So there's a differentiation. That's a differential with her, is that her social skills quite apparently are not great. She's great with maybe adults, but not really. She just doesn't have a lot of friends.
The two aspects that are primary in the nerd, introspection and smartness, butts up against the charismatic and outrageous qualities of the geeks, who are obsessed with recognition via what some would call gamification, or the concept of video game-like point hoarding a la Twitter followers and the like for status. This may have something to do with why we see so few quote-unquote nerds on TV and in films these days who have been replaced by their far more colorful and saleable, thus marketable, geeks. Don't get me wrong here. Geeks are smart too. Very smart. But there's a difference between the fairly decent-looking geeks of Big Bang Theory and the weird nerdo misfits we'll never see on TV or in many films aside from the most alternative underground fare. This may have something to do with what journalist and author Alexandra Robbins charts out in her 2011 book, The Geeks Shall Inherit the Earth, in which she states that nerds have technical skills but no social skills. Dorks have neither technical nor social skills, and geeks have technical skills and social skills. Even getting smart geeks on screen, though, has been a long, grueling process, according to Reiss. As a pro in writing television for many, many years, with writing credits that go far beyond The Simpsons, Reiss filled me in about how hard it is to get smart characters on screen in the first place.
I think I know this from working in TV, where you would pitch a show. I spent years trying to pitch different sitcoms about smart people. And network executives would tell me over and over, nobody wants to see smart people. They don't like smart people. People at home are dumb, and they like to watch a good dumb guy on TV. And, I can't imagine how hard it was to get the Big Bang Theory on TV. You could never sell that just walking in the door of the network. That is a show about four nerds, and they are really nerdy nerds that, oh, surprise, everybody loves them. They don't hate nerds. They like nerds. They like smart people. They like, oddball characters. America took them to heart. I think the longest running kind of sustained live action character in TV history is Frasier, who's sort of this, extraordinarily smart character. A little fussy and prim. He's not at all what the networks think America wants to see on TV. American people like nerds. They like smart characters. They like monks,
Comic book guy, though, is not a hipster and not just an asshole. As priggish as he might seem, a la Steve Jobs, who reputedly used to brag about what an asshole he was, but was still something of a misfit outsider in the geek paradigm, comic book guy is still a salesman, and a successful one at that. People off screen may love his smarmy ways, but clearly the folks in Springfield do too. No one else has dared move in to try their hand at the comic book store racket. Obviously, the citizens of Springfield like him enough to keep him afloat. Like Steve Jobs before him, he's not just an asshole, he's a geek.
Oh, no, he's a geek. Yeah. He's definitely a geek. Because if you think of that as a verb of geeking out on something, he definitely is geeking out on the comic books and has a certain air about him that, is like the people that, he really does have like there's a part of him that feels he's above it all with everyone else. Like you go, I've got this. Not only do I have it, but I'm the best at it that there is. That's when it's like totally geeking out. Like you think that, like Trump, he's a geek. No, it's like for him, the ego of the comic book guy is really incredible.
Maggie's right here. Let's consider the discussion had, and that starts on a rather ironic bent, when record store worker Barry, played by Jack Black in the 2000 film High Fidelity, is asked by store regular Lewis why Black would sell him a record he just denied another customer who has left in a huff. Barry's response is that Lewis is not a geek. Lewis goes on to chastise Barry, along with store owner John Cusack, as the lovelorn Rob for being snobs. When the third member of their hapless working triumvirate, Dick, suggests they're not, Lewis continues, quote, "Yeah, seriously, you're totally elitist. You feel like the unappreciated scholars, so you shit on people who know lesser than you." End quote. Before they have a chance to finish denying this astute observation, the boys are told by Lewis that by people, he means everyone. Essentially, that they're indeed superior to everyone. This the boys heartily agree with in Greek chorus style. But perhaps the best, if not at least earliest definition of the geek, and we're not talking here about the first usage for those word geeks out there who know it's Shakespeare, which can be found in the work of 17th century French playwright Molière. The personality of comic book guy and his, quote, being so arrogant and protective of these minor ephemeral things, end quote, as Mike Reiss puts it, can be traced back in literature at least as far as Molière's The Misanthrope. It is here where we have gossipy gadfly Celimene languishing of the character Dami, quote, "Since he took it into his head to be clever, he is so difficult to please that nothing suits his taste. He must needs find mistakes in everything that one writes, and thinks that to bestow praise does not become a wit, that to find fault shows learning, that only fools admire and laugh, and that by not approving of anything in the works of our time, he is superior to all other people. Even in conversations he finds something to cavil at. The subjects are too trivial for his condescension, and, with arms crossed on his breast, he looks down from the height of his intellect with pity on what everyone says." End quote. The nerd has no ego. Like Lisa. Most of the time, she just doesn't care. Comic book guy cares a lot. His identity, his persona, his profile online or off is all important. Lisa, just leave her alone in her room to nerd out on her sax, please. That's what she cares about. Think of that scene back in The Simpsons when she overhears someone say something that was grammatically incorrect. We zoom in on her eyes and we hear her brain say, "I know, I heard it too." Here's some music. Suddenly classical music starts to play in her head, and she's sated. That's all Lisa needs as a nerd. That's what it is to be nerdy. Think about what happens too in a later episode when Lisa the nerd tries to help out Mo, the bartender, with a series of poetry that she discovers on his refrigerator. Basically, she slaps it together from a bunch of crazy rantings and various ideas that he has on said fridge. She tries to take Mo's nerdiness, his own introspective ideas and concepts, thoughts and feelings, and do something geeky with it, which is to turn it into poetry and get it out into the world. It obviously does not end well for either of them. And for those of you who think I'm going too far, being too didactic here, yeah, you're probably right. I am a self-proclaimed dilettante at times. But at least I made Maggie Roswell laugh with a Molière reference. How geeky is that?
There it is.
See, and I love that we would have the misanthrope and comic book guy.
But back to Lisa being a nerd. Maggie and I discussed ultra-nerdy comic book writer and creator of Watchmen, Alan Moore, to his geeky protege, Neil Gaiman, a true showman if you catch the formula now, and his aphorism that, quote, "You can't control the wave, only how you surf," end quote, which is pretty much the main tenet of Buddhism and the idea of being here and now, or present as they call it, at its most fundamental. Perhaps then, it's no surprise that Lisa, with pretty much no ego and just doing her own nerdy thing, just being present as a nerd, partway through the series becomes a Buddhist. What's really interesting here in our rather desultory, all-over-the-place discussion is that Maggie believes this may actually have something to do with Lisa being a girl nerd as opposed to being a guy nerd. She wants friends, and maybe even a boyfriend, but gets to the point that because she's an introspective nerd, she ultimately doesn't care. Again, she can just listen to beautiful music in her head instead.
Right. She doesn't, but there's the vulnerability that comes from Lisa. That's the thing that is different. And maybe it's the female male nerd. And then that might be a thing within itself, is the fact that she would like to be liked, but she eventually has to get to where she doesn't care. Everybody wants to be liked, but I think at a certain point that between the male and the female, that you figure the girls that are nerds, now it's okay to be a nerd, it's okay to wear glasses. But you have to remember the days of saying, boys don't make passes at girls that wear glasses. And Lisa, how much, if you go all the way back to when in one of the first episodes, one of my favorite with Sam Ettick, with Dustin Hoffman, when he was a substitute teacher, and how she just, fell for him and all of that stuff, how, his brain, his everything. It's like you can watch her with the way that now they have many more female writers. They have female writers. But before, the male, piece of it, of on that side of her being a nerd, she is, but she would love, and that's why I said the thing was, she would love to have all the friends that Bart has. She just has realized she's smarter than everybody. We just did a show just recently where she's going, don't be the know-it-all, don't be the know-it-all, don't be the know-it-all, because she realizes that she's smarter than most of the people. But I think there's a part where chicks would trade it, and that, you don't want to demean women by saying they would trade it all for a guy. Not that, but there's a part of it, she didn't want to dumb it down, but she wanted people to be smart. She just wanted people to be smarter, but she also wanted to be popular within that. So I think that was always her, I don't think she wanted to be popular as much. She just would like to have had friends. And I think she always assumed that Bart had a lot of friends. But just like I said, he had Millhouse, and he had, people knew him, and even the bullies would bully him or whatever. But people would kind of do a wide berth around Lisa because she was so smart. She was so, she was grounded and smart. But I think she also would have liked to have, someone that on her level, which is why I think she fell for her substitute teacher, is because they were so smart. They realized, that, you see the teachers like Krabappel and Miss Hoover, although she's fabulous, Miss Hoover, who could really give a rip, but she wanted someone on her own level at some point to find someone. To know that she's the smartest in her family, that's a rough call, So, that is where on one hand, she was blessed with all that. And I think that Marge, if she had let herself, really study or do that, might have been that. It doesn't just come from nowhere. But I do think that with Lisa, she just realized that was the path to take. But I think she would have loved to have had, relationships and boyfriends and all of that stuff as well. So that's where I think the difference of the nerds and the geeks, somehow it's easier for the boys to be the, nerd, geek, whatever. Although now, just like I said, it's a whole different boogie. And we're at the year 28 on The Simpsons. And you can see the shift that's happened within the shows and with everything. But back in the first 10 years, you still were dealing with a lot of the stereotypes of what all of those things meant. And for female or male, was it okay to be that, or were you, always waiting to have a prince whisk you away? But Lisa never wanted to dumb it down, and I think that that's a smart thing on her part.
Right.
But she'd have been the CEO of a company that would have been able to balance it out with, her life and a relationship and all of that? Or would she just be the CEO of a company and go, and that's what they would grapple with when they would fast forward of them being older. Because did she just become a CEO of a company, or did she also have a family and all of that stuff? Because when we first started, you're at the very end of the 80s, and people are just coming out of, 60s, 70s, trying to figure out what they were doing. And then by the time you're, getting into the end of the 80s, you still have people trying to figure it out as far as the, female revolution and all of that.
Some may see the character of Professor Frink, voiced by Hank Azaria, and somewhat based on Jerry Lewis's The Nutty Professor of 1963, to be the main nerd on The Simpsons. In fact, this was not the original intention. Any association we see with Frank and nerd comes mainly from some pastiche fun that the writers of The Simpsons were having with Jerry Lewis's modern classic of cinematic comedy. This is similar to their reverent playfulness the writers of The Simpsons were exhibiting when they brought in the characters that Reiss sees as the nerdiest on the show so far. These are Homer's buddies from college, Benjamin, Doug, and Gary, whom, in all fairness, Reiss mixes up a bit in this segment with some of Martin Prince's friends, Data and Cosine. Like with Frank, the writers here are not making fun so much of nerds as they are the pop culture cliches and movie tropes of nerds that we see on screen.
I don't think the term nerd was even in circulation at the time Jerry Lewis made The Nutty Professor. So, we can say, oh, here's an archetypal nerd, but I don't think the term or the classification even existed at that point. So, Professor Frank, if he's anything, at the time he was created, he was the stereotypical absent-minded professor. So that goes for him. And certainly if you watch the episode that created Data and Cosine, I can never remember the third guy. That was, again, it was Homer goes to college, and because all he knows about college is what he's seen in college comedy, he hates nerds, and he wants to beat up nerds, and then he winds up befriending these stereotypical nerds and doesn't even realize they're nerds. So, I think even there, the whole point of creating those characters is sort of to poke fun at how kind of cheesy comedies had created this concept of nerd.
Maggie Roswell agrees that there's some fun to be had with not so much the stereotypical nerd as the stereotypical tropes and cliches that we see so often in movies about nerds, especially those from the 80s. Let's consider her cult classic, hint, hint, the 1980 film Midnight Movies, in which she stars with another guy that we know from our past, Paul Reubens, who'd become Pee Wee Herman a little bit later. In this film, Maggie acts with Eddie Deason, who would become a real cliche nerd throughout films of the 80s and even TV shows too. You might know the squeaky-voiced, bespectacled Eddie Deason from such shows as Punky Brewster, where he was a precursor to the types of characters that we'd see on screen a little later on, like Saved by the Bell's Screech. He was also the character of Eugene in both Grease 1 and 2. Here's what Maggie has to say about Deason and these kinds of cliches of nerds in movies on screen.
You used to have a pencil protector is what the nerd was back in the day. A pencil protector that would be in your white shirt that would be short sleeve, and then you would have your little pencil protector in there in your pocket, and you would have, your slacks, because it wouldn't be jeans, that would be, but just slacks, and then the pencil protector and, little tiny glasses. I think that Eddie Deason has played more nerds and geeks than anyone in the world, and his voice is that just like this, and he's got this great voice like that, and he always plays the geeks and the nerds. So he was the ultimate that would play that.
Though Maggie, like Mike Reiss, sees Milhouse as inherently emblematic of the dork, she can't help but see another character on the show who is equally clueless and neither social nor smart as a dork. Once again, we're talking here of the beloved Ralph Wiggum.
That to me, there's a dorkiness about that. And I think as far as the dorkiness of having neither, he's obviously not very bright. And so I think that he would probably be in the dork category, I would think, because he just doesn't have a clue.
So let's circle back around to the idea of Kirk, Milhouse's dad, as the dork, to his on-again, off-again wife Luann, voiced by Maggie, remember, being a nerd, or possibly even a geek, and how this dynamic of dude nerd versus chick nerd comes into play. Maggie here goes into some pretty good stuff about how Milhouse is playing at the top of his game and won't get any smarter. And yet he will always be, because of this, a dork. Again, it's in his blood from Father Kirk, the ultimate dork, and perhaps, in fact, dorkiest guy on the whole show. There's nothing Milhouse can do about it. Damn it, he is a dork. Listen closely, and you'll also hear in Maggie's response here that yes, perhaps Milhouse is the dork to Ralph, who is really just, once again, as she keeps putting it, dim.
Oh, yeah, well, yeah. I mean, Kirk is definitely a dork. I mean, I think that obviously Luann is smarter than Kirk and never wanted him to know that. But, you know, because she was able to kind of go out on her own and do hers, come on, Luann. But, you know, I think with Milhouse, he's playing at the top of his game. And so that's the other thing. You know, I think that he probably would be in the dork category because he's not going to get any smarter. It's not like he's going to get, you know, he's going to get better. She loves him because he is playing at the top of his game and trying to be the best. He's being the best as he can be, which is dorky. I think Ralph is actually, you know, he's dim. So I don't know if there's a difference between dork and dim.
All right. So yes, in the end, at least we have Maggie Roswell agreeing more or less that we can see the nerd in Lisa, the geek and comic book guy, and the dork in Milhouse, for whatever that's worth.
Yes, I think that makes total sense because I do believe, you know, geeking out is a verb and Lisa as the nerd. And then now is Lisa, you know, Lisa, the thing I did love about it is that, you know, she was really, you know, a role model for a lot of little girls. That it's okay for you to be who you were. But I also think that, you know, when you talk about the norm, you know, which is what we were all raised with when we were girls, you know, I went to Catholic school, and the good thing was that nobody said stupid it up for the boys. So everybody could play at the top of their game because you weren't trying to impress somebody in class. And that is, you know, that's why they've talked about girls' schools and boys' schools. Now, I think emotionally the girls in Catholic schools, forget about it. But I do think as far as on the other side, as far as them being able to be all that they could be as far as their, you know, brain power really was a great thing. And I think with Lisa, that really was that at least she didn't dumb it down. And I love that about her.
Yeah.
You know, and that I think is where the geek is. The geek doesn't dumb it down. I mean, you look at, you know, look at Big Bang. He's not dumbing it down for him. And when, you know, even people say, well, explain it to us. And he's like going, I'm trying, you know, you go. I mean, there is that thing as Hal said, you know, there's some people that you can say, what time is it? And they'll tell you the time and someone else will tell you how to build a watch. And I think that's where the geek is, you know. I mean, not the geek, I mean the nerd. The nerd will tell you how to build a watch.
Well, you know what? You're not going to get Mike Reiss to agree. To Reiss, there's no way Lisa's a nerd. She's too empathetic. She cares too much about other people. And she's not unaware enough of the outside world to be definitively nerdy, Reiss feels. Comic book guy may not even be a geek, according to him.
I'm not buying it. I'm not buying it. You know, I don't even know if I'd fit her in one of those three boxes. If I was just sorting people, if I would put her into nerd as opposed to geek. And I don't even know if comic book guy is a geek. I sort of get him being a geek, except he's got, you know, geek, you know, he's got such self-assurance and self-possession to him. You know, it's easier to sell me on him as a geek. Lisa, I'm not buying it, her as a nerd. Milhouse, we can all agree, is a dork. That's my take on things. But again, if there's anything universal, Milhouse is a dork. And a dork, I guess, to me, is just a nerd who's not smart.
Jeepers. So in the end, am I just putting out here another one of those apocryphal, meandering PhD-type theses brimming with errors that Reiss would inevitably mark off with red pen until growing tired of wasting his ink and moving on? Yeah, probably. But it's still fun to pick his brain about it and to speak with such a nerd who wrote a geeky show that even the dorks could love.
Part of, I think, what was always on our minds that first season of Simpsons before we came on was we thought nobody was going to watch it. You know, we were making the show, and I know, at least I'm on record, I thought the show was going to last 6 episodes, and that would be it. And I know that first year we were writing the show, we said, well, let's not make a show like, let's not make it the kind of show we see on TV. Let's make the kind of show we want to see on TV. And we had so much fun that first year just doing it because we were really just entertaining ourselves and doing the kind of work we would like to see on TV. And then it was just this amazing surprise that, the world liked it too. It's enormously gratifying to do a show where you go, you work hard not to pander. You know, let's not do that. You know, it's like what I said about Helen Lovejoy. Let's not do the cheap and easy take on the minister. Let's work hard. Let's make things different. Let's not go for the easy joke. And let's do weird stuff and do things. Let's do some jokes that only 2% of the audience is going to get. And we got to do all that, and hey, we're still a hit. You know, we were a hit in spite of our cleverness.
All right. Well, I want to thank you all for letting me wax a little extra poetic this time around, or whatever you want to call it. I know that this one was a bit longer than usual. It might have been a little tough having two instead of just one person talking with me today. But hopefully you got something out of this. I don't know. Maybe you understand a little bit more about what it means to be a nerd, geek, and dork, or maybe you don't care. Very likely you didn't even get this far in the podcast, but hopefully you did, because I really want to thank Maggie Roswell and Mike Reiss. They are good friends and great people. I love talking to them whenever I can. I also want to thank Pat Malik of Mighty Fudge Studios, the animation studio out there in Boulder, Colorado, for originally connecting me with Maggie and her fantastic husband, Hal, a few years ago. They really are pretty incredible people, and to get to hang out with folks from The Simpsons like that is a rare treat, especially when they're willing to actually talk to you about The Simpsons. As always, I want to thank my producer and the guy who did the music for the show, Mark Johnston. I want to thank the fine people here at the Lawrence Public Library, especially Sean Wilson, for helping me out in the studio. I actually am not going to probably be using the studio anymore, because and this is your host here, Mathew Klickstein, am moving on to Baltimore, Maryland for various reasons, so off I go. So there will probably also be a little hiatus between now and the next episode as I move, and I'm also dealing with some other fun stuff with the Mark Summers documentary I'm finishing up. You can find more information about that at marksummersmovie.com. And I guess that's it for now. So thank you for taking the time. Hope that you have a great rest of your summer. Stay nerdy, stay geeky, stay dorky, stay yourself, and listen to NERTZ when we come back next time. Love ya.